I call this meeting to order of the Comox Valley Regional District Electoral Area Services Committee for Monday, August 10th, 2020. This committee is being run in according to the CVRD procedural bylaw. And this meeting may include participation by members of the committee via electronic communication. But I'm happy to say that all three electoral areas are here today. A little bit of housekeeping for all those who are new to our Comox Valley Regional District building. The washrooms are in behind here, out through the hallway and down and on your right. And emergency exits, as you can see, are here and here at the end, as well as where you came in. In case there is an emergency, the mustering point is at the parking lot at the back of the building. So we will vacate the building in case of an emergency and assemble there. I'd like to also recognize the fact that we are doing our business today on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox Valley owned Comox First Nation. Okay, well, we're going to plow right on the agenda. Our first order of business today is a delegation. We have a delegation, Jackie Aiton, Paul Crawford, Jamie Shepherd, Holiday Road, Cougar Smith, Archella neighborhood. But before we get, is Archella? Okay. Move second on receipt. Okay, before we get going, I have a little prepared statement speaking to decorum at these meetings. Next on the agenda is a delegation of residents from Holiday, Artella, and Cougar Smith Road area concerning the activities and unsightly nature of a few neighboring properties. Before we welcome this delegation, I need to make some brief comments respecting the tone and nature of this subject. Bylaw enforcement matters are a complex issue that can involve conflict between private individuals and their use and development of their property. Such issues can result in real and perceived issues concerning safety, security, and can affect people's use and enjoyment of their property and home. Regional District is committed to ensuring administrative fairness in respect to our bylaw enforcement program. Within the established framework, enforcement decisions are designed to staff, and this is essential to an administratively fair bylaw enforcement system. All enforcement matters are considered confidential, so details respecting specific complaints or investigations will not be discussed at this open meeting. Decorum, civility, respect for personal privacy must be maintained during the presentation of any substantial discussion or debate. In this regard, comments must focus on the issues and activities and not on any specific individuals or personalities. This is not intended to impede accountability or trivialize the significance of the issues being faced, but to protect privacy, personal privacy of individuals and maintain the integrity of the bylaw enforcement process. So in a nutshell, we're very interested in the what, in the where, in the how, but not the who. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the delegation to come forward to the podium and present your presentation. Can we get that mic up? Oh, just press a little button there. It should come up. Your mic should be on.
Press the little buttons.
Was it automatically on? Hold on.
Is it on?
Beautiful.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. And we'll do our best to respect what you've just told us as well. We're trying to work here through the process. So my name's Jamie Shepherd. I live on Holiday Road, 460 Holiday Road, which is directly across the road from the property that I have concerns with. So on the evening of July 22nd, The rain began to pour down, yet still nearly 50 neighbors, clad with umbrellas and chairs, descended upon the cul-de-sac of Holiday Road. We worked together to quickly string up a massive tarp that spanned the road. Daniel can attest to that, because this is how our neighborhood works. We take care and look out for one another. Rural community is unique to its city cousin, the very reason most of us choose to live where we do. We wave or holler hello in passing. We stop and lend a hand if someone needs it. Even if they don't want it, we offer. We gather for a potluck dinner at Christmas in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is a good kind of unique. Now, if that all sounds appealing to anyone, I'll let you know there's a property for sale, 501 Holiday Road. We call it The Lot. We would love to have another name for it. Like if John bought the place, we'd love to call it John's Place. But as long as the current owner owns it, it will be The Lot. The revolving door of problems associated with the lot will continue. At least that is what the last 2 decades have provided as an example. So you may be asking, why now? Because we're fed up. Since June, we've seen a parade of trucks hauling scrap cars, tow trucks hauling scrap cars and trucks. So we thought, okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Then the police recover a stolen truck from Port Hardy. It was at The Lot. Okay, this is 2020, so what next? We're all shocked. An irrational and irate guy, because I can't call him a man, with 2 machetes was banging on Paul and Allison's door. That's not our neighborhood. He walked by my house to get to their doorstep. He would have just as easily been at my door. My door was wide open at the time. The what ifs are terrifying. What if my kids were out playing in the yard? What if Paul had not been home? What could have happened to Allison? What if? That has played out in the minds of every single person on our road. At the best, we're a 30-minute response from the RCMP. A lot can happen in 30 minutes. It didn't happen this time, simply because Paul was able to calmly control the situation for half an hour, which seems like a bit of a miracle, and I'm doubtful that that calmness would have been maintained at my own doorstep. So what if there's a next time? Our neighborhood has seniors who are terrified. They live alone. My kids are nervous. They had to endure an awkward and rather serious conversation about drugs and needles because a needle was found on the road in front of the lot. And mental health. These are all things kids should not have to learn about. And they should not have to realize that is next door to them. The conversation ended with my kids with, so that's why you can't ride your bike up the road to visit your friends anymore. First, it was COVID-19 that put them in lockdown, and now this. My 9-year-old can drive a tractor, yet I can't let him ride his bike up the road. So that is why our neighborhood gathered together on July 22nd, because we do not want a next time. We will not allow the property owner and his revolving door of tenants control our neighborhood. Our first goal was to stop or deter the current activities at the lot. And with the RCMP, it did quiet down. After a week of them meeting up with police every time they came and went, it did quiet down. But they're still there. It's not as active, but they are still there. I have a camera on my driveway that faces theirs. I see the comings and goings. I am pleased with how the police have helped us, and the 2 members even attended our neighborhood gathering, and I'm very thankful with it for what they've done for us. We also had neighbors from Cougar Smith, Yake, and Artella to come to our meeting. And honestly, I can't believe what they're putting up with on a daily basis on their road. And I'm encouraging them to reach out to you and share their story as well. I won't do it justice. They need to share their story with you. Goal number 2 for us is to find a permanent solution that will rid our neighborhood of the property owner's revolving door tenants once and for all. Daniel Arbor also attended our neighborhood meeting, and he assured us that our concerns would be heard at the CDRD, and I'm thankful that we get to be here today. So here we are to find out what you can do for us and what we can do to assist you in making a change happen. I know this is not a small problem, and I know it's not localized to just a property on our road. I know it's bigger than that, and we want to help make our problem go away and other people's problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jackie Ayton. I live at 529 Holiday Road, directly beside the 501 lot. I thought I could bring some background, and talking with the neighbors, this property's been for sale for quite a while. Actually, it's been for sale for on and off for 18 years. And I think that the condition of being for sale allows the owner to skate past some bylaws. And that's something that perhaps you guys need to discuss and actually have some way of determining if a property is legitimately for sale. There was an ad in the last newspaper supplement at the turn of the month. One price was listed at $575,000. Another, on this next page, it was listed for $630,000. A woman that I know who was interested in buying the property phoned the real estate agents and was told blankly that it was not $630,000, it was $680,000. So I have doubts if it's actually legitimately for sale or not. And that's something that needs to be determined, because 18 years is a long time for a property to be for sale. And it's interesting how it's been listed with the same people for that long. There have been problems for the last 20 years. What I've noticed recently is cars coming and going for brief minutes. About 10 years ago, there was people there selling drugs. Cars would drive up, be there for 2 minutes, and drive away. We're starting to see the same pattern again. And these people aren't interested in our road. They're not worried about people's kids on the road, Jamie's kids playing or anything. They zoom up, stay there for 2 minutes, playing their loud music that I can hear from about 500 feet away, and zoom away. This is any time, and usually it's at night. That's when the property is busiest. There's nothing going on during the day. It's busiest at night, and there's stuff happening. Hydro has been there. They had an illegal hydro hookup. Hydro's turned off, has disconnected the power, and that's calmed things down a lot. But it hasn't made things change. And all we do is wait for the next shoe to drop. And it's not, COVID's been stressful. I mean, everybody can realize that. COVID has been a big trauma to our whole society. Having to deal with something like this on top of it, it's becoming awful. It's an awful way to live. We have a farm, we have dogs, we have animals. I'm worried about them during the day. If I'm not home, that somebody's going to come across, let the dogs out, bother my animals, let the animals out. There's always that stress of not knowing what's going to happen next as a pressure on top of you. And it's very, very uncomfortable. And I hope you guys realize that. And I had a different idea of why I was here, what we would be discussing. And I understand now that you guys can't openly discuss things with us, and that's fine. But I would also like to know if there's more steps we can take. We did see, I think it was in Nanaimo, a property declared a nuisance property. And that, I don't know if you guys have that kind of bylaw here. And that puts pressure on the owner that every time the police go, the health department goes, this plethora of government that can intervene, that the owner is made to pay for it. We worry about fire. That place doesn't have water. The people are living there. There is no water this time of year. The wells have dried up. There is no septic. People are living there. There's no septic. So, and what's going to happen is they're probably just, going to the bathroom in the woods. Once it starts to rain, all that waste is going to be coming down into our water systems, contaminating our wells and properties. And I think it's probably enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I was supposed to go first this morning, but I had to revise my notes here a little bit because of the restrictions. My name's Paul Crawford. I'm here on behalf of the residents of Holiday Road, Cougar Smith, and I'm understanding recently that numerous other neighborhoods around the Comox Valley are dealing with the same stuff. My wife and I have lived on Holiday Road for 22 years, where we raised our children, now young adults. We've watched the comings and goings of 501 for 18 of those 22 years. We would, for the most part, turn a blind eye, even though we knew what was going on. Didn't really find out how bad it was until recently. Chain of events have changed the way we view Holiday Road, the tenants, and in particular, the landowner. In the last few months, we've been responsible or helped in the recovery of 3 stolen vehicles, 2 vehicles with mismatched license plates, and 1 uninsured or expired plates, all products of 501 Holiday Road. I say products because these properties are breeding grounds for this type of activity and the type of people that reside there. This is what it does to a person who lives on Holiday Road. What's really put things over the top is a machete packing, whacked out crackhead pounding on our front door and our windows while my wife is in the house alone. There's no place for that anywhere, and it sure is not out there. Drug addicts, drug dealing, drug use, vehicle theft, property theft, suspicious late night activity, late night traffic, environmental abuse of property, pollution, unfit living accommodations, inappropriate use of land, non-conforming to the neighborhood, whatever that means. Nothing good ever happens at that property, and it's getting worse. As one group gets moved out, another group comes in. They just get shuffled around from property to property. What was our problem last week is someone else's problem tomorrow. Where once we used to walk up the road with our children, a picnic basket, camera, and fishing poles. Now I carry a club, a knife, bear spray, whatever I can to protect myself and my family. It's a pretty sad world when tax-paying residents of a neighborhood have to live in fear of the very people our tax dollars are paying to support. But even worse is a property owner can thrive off proceeds of crime and taxpayer dollars. There's something not quite right about these properties and the landlord who owns them. This crap just continues year after year, property to property. I certainly don't have the answers, but something has to be done. There's no halfway on this one. These properties need to be sold, gone, before somebody gets seriously hurt. The taxpayers, we're not going away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Who was first? Doesn't show in here. I'll take Arzina first. Director Amir.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I just want to thank the residents of Holiday Road in the area for your presentations. I can assure you that your experiences are being heard, and we fully understand how difficult this must be for you. I had a question for Ms. Ayton, if you don't mind. Your comment about the property being up for sale and impacting bylaw enforcement. Do you mind elaborating a little bit about what you mean around that?
Hi, I've heard that properties that are actively for sale are treated differently by bylaw officers. And I mean, if it's legitimately for sale, you know, and they're not enforcing everything to the letter of the law because it's for sale, so the problem will disappear. That's fine, but I mean, you have to realize that this property is not for sale. There might be a sign. It might be listed in the newspaper, but it doesn't seem to be legitimately for sale. And that's a concern, because if that's a way to skate around bylaws and to get sort of, you know, like, oh, it'll be sold soon, blah, 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 and have things put off, I think that needs to be reconsidered by the officers in charge.
Thank you. So maybe if I could, as follow-up to staff, on how this property has been treated. Is there a file open? And if you could explain what the process has been.
Through the CAO.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and a very good question. Amanda Yasinski is here, our Manager of Bylaw Compliance, who is overseeing the files and can answer a question of that nature. I'll refer it to her.
Good morning to the Chair and Director. So Bylaw's been aware of this property being listed on and off for the duration of our files. We do have a current and active file at the moment, as we have in previous years. The sailing or the listing of any property during an active enforcement file, it doesn't change any approach whatsoever for the regional district. And I can assure you this property in particular has not changed how we've approached enforcement, both previous and there's active enforcement ongoing as well. If a property is for sale and there's some enforcement issues, particularly around building, we tend to address them during the sale. So someone's not inheriting the issue, especially if it's a suite or something like that, that's not, you know, appropriate. So usually if a property is for sale and we have an enforcement issue, it actually encourages us to further that and make sure everything's covered before it changes hands, not the opposite.
Director Arbour.
Thank you, and thank you to the delegation for coming and speaking to us today about the problem. I think you made it very clear. My concern is, you know, being mindful that we have drug and criminality problems in every community in the Comox Valley, that we have a health crisis around drug use and all the rest of that. So I do not want to diminish the complex aspects of trying to address that. But in the rural areas, I think what echoes with me is just that extra risk and danger, in the sense that we are, I think you voiced it very well, we are far away from support services. And in the middle of the night, there's just not a lot of recourse for quick action, or in the middle of the day for that matter. I'm very thankful for the RCMP response on this file. And I think that having residents speak with one voice and everybody agreeing on what needs to happen is really good. But let's not kid ourselves. This is totally a systemic problem. And I think what I hate is that when an issue like that goes on for 20 years and somebody finds a way to basically game the system to their advantage, and it's frustrating. For the regional district, I am concerned, and I think we probably will have more discussions on this at the CRD, and we've had in the past. But in my community on Hornby, there was an issue like that for 15 years, and it was basically not as bad as this case because criminality didn't seem to be as much of a factor. It was just totally messy property. And the homeowners successfully sued the Islands Trust and the regional district on that file for failure to act. So it is something that we need to think about very seriously, especially when it goes on for many, 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 many years. And all I'll say is that you have my full commitment, my personal commitment. I can't make it for the district, but that we need to see a solution to this problem, and that whatever tools at our disposal should be applied, because the last thing I want to see is a bad incident happening in your area. As you aptly described, it came really close in the last few weeks. And it's completely unacceptable. And I know some people in the municipalities will say, well, welcome to the world. But again, it's that half hour, all the stuff that you talk about, it's a little bit different. You don't have that 3 or 4 minute response time as you do here, right? So really want to thank you for your presentation, and we will move this forward.
Thank you very much. And Director Hamir?
Thank you. Question for staff. One of the delegates asked if we have a nuisance property declaration or some kind of way of identifying properties that and having some kind of recourse. And so question to staff is if we do have anything like that in our toolbox.
Not at present. The regional district doesn't. The nuisance property provisions are something more common within municipalities that do have different authority than regional districts do. The topic did arise at one of our previous meetings, and I think staff will be providing some more information to the board with respect to the nuisance properties and why it may or may not apply to regional districts. So we will get back to you with more information.
Sorry, one question maybe for Amanda. Seeing as there doesn't seem to be water or septic, and there seems to be quite a big health issue, how does bylaw work with Island Health when something like that happens? And are there other, I guess, mechanisms that Island Health has that we don't?
Through the chair, actually on Holiday Road, there is an approved septic field and a drilled well on site. The occupants who stay there do not have access to it. It's just there. They have no way to hook up to it. With anything we come across, sometimes we get complaints directly about lack of septic or water. We forward those on to Island Health. Or if it's something that staff observes on one of these properties, we pass it on. We have been to Holiday Road and Cougar Smith with Island Health numerous times, countless times. They are looking into issues as well, and we'll continue to work with them as well as the other agencies involved, but it does lie strictly through Island Health. Like us, what they can do is issue an order basically to comply, to either fix, a septic system that's not functioning any longer, to put in a field. They have quite a few powers. They also have that direction on water, potable water in particular, and I know that they're looking at options on the properties as well.
Remind directors that you need to use your little talk button to make sure your lights are on, otherwise they can't hear you on YouTube. Director Arbor.
Yeah, there's just one final comment I'd like to make on this file, because I went back to the files and look at the newspaper coverage over the years. And in one instance, the owner of the property had made comments that he was providing affordable housing for people in need. I just want to say I'm not fooled by that. I believe the circumstances would suggest that this is somebody that takes advantage of people in need and probably makes their cycle of troubles worse.
Get you to turn your mic off if you could. Thank you very much. So any further questions of our delegation? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to receive the presentation. Did we do it already? Oh, okay, then we'll take a vote on it, sorry. So all those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. We certainly appreciate taking time out of your day to bring this forward to the board, the committee, and the greater community. Moving on now to management report for receipt. Any discussion on the management report? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on that. All in favor? Yeah. Okay, we'll just Director Arbor would like to say goodbye, so better hurry. You'll have to quarantine for 14 days now, Director. Okay, thanks very much. We're on reports. And we have the Advisory Planning Commission minutes for report. If somebody wants to move A, C, and the Agricultural Advisory Commission. Okay, all at once. Any discussion on the minutes? Call the question. All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. Now, Electoral Area C Development Variance Permit 2C20-6488 Eagles Drive. A report for receipt. Okay. And over to staff for introductions.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Dylan Thiessen is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you for that, Russell. Good morning to the committee. Through the chair to the directors, this presentation is on a development variance permit in order to reduce the front yard setback. So the applicant is constructing a detached dwelling unit on a property that has two front yard lot lines. One is adjacent to Eagles Drive, which is the access road, and another one adjacent to Lamb Road, which is an unopened Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure right-of-way, as well as a CVRD park. Given that the zoning bylaw defines a front lot line as any lot line common to the lot and a highway, even the unopened right-of-way means that the adjacent lot line is considered a front rather than a side yard lot line. The variance sought is a reduction of 3 meters from 7.5 to 4.5 meters for the foundation of the dwelling, and another variance is sought being a reduction of 2 meters from 5.5 to 3.5 meters for the eaves of the dwelling. The variance is being considered at this meeting prior to its discussion at an advisory planning commission meeting. It will, however, be discussed at the APC meeting for Electoral Area C on August 13th later this week. And members' comments will be included in time for the August 25th board meeting, so you will certainly still have a chance to consider APC members' feedback. Staff did solicit feedback from all property owners within a 100-meter radius of the subject property and received correspondence from one neighbor, one neighbor who owns both properties just north of the park, who is in favor of the variance being supported. Staff are also in support of the application for multiple reasons. First, the reduced setback meets the side yard setbacks, which, while not the strict wording of the zoning bylaw, is its intent. Staff and other departments, importantly including the Parks Department, had no objections or concerns with the variance being approved, and the reduction still respects the purpose of the setback. There are no privacy concerns, and there is still enough space for access and maintenance. With that, I will let you know that the applicant is in attendance to answer any further questions, and of course, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have as well. Thank you.
Does the applicant wish to speak?
Sure. I would only like to point out that the reason that this is being considered as a front yard is that there was an omission of language that has been in the bylaw and is in many bylaws across the province that states that typically the front yard property line that is the shortest is considered to be the front yard for the purposes of setbacks. And any other property lines that face a road right of way or any other kind of road are considered to be a side yard facing a road, which is typically the setback that we're asking for right now. This language has been omitted from the bylaw, not on purpose, and the intent that I understand from Ton is that it's going to be put back into the bylaw as soon as possible. So we're not asking for anything that hasn't been a precedent for as long as I've been doing business. That's it. Any questions?
Stick around in case you get a grilling. Any questions of the proponent? Director Arbor?
Just if I can get confirmation from staff to the comments.
Okay.
Thank you. Through the chair to the directors. That's correct, Director Arbor. The intention is to bring something back to the committee and the board, maybe September, just to do a couple quick amendments to the zone bylaw. And this is one of the case.
So this is a bit of an anomaly that even after all your hard work over that 2-year stint rewriting all the bylaws, this one kind of slipped through. My question is that this construction window that we're looking at now is closing quickly. How long has the proponent had to wait to get the approvals to go ahead on this?
Thank you, Chair. We've been speaking with that. Well, planning's been speaking with their agent, I would say last month, and hence we've been trying to fast track this for him due to their construction window. Hence, this is why we're presenting this file to the committee before the APC meeting, and hoping that if there's no concerns through the APC meeting on the 13th, we can go straight to the board for approval. And by the end of the month, August 25th, I think is the next board meeting, we can issue their building permit on August 26th.
That's great. Thank you very much for expediting it. Okay. So we are on receipt of the report. All in favor of receipt of the report, and motion to receive Bruce and Jean Bell's letter as well. Any discussion? All in favor? Carries. There's nothing on the addendum, is there? No, nothing on the addendum. That's good. So, in the Electoral Area Services Committee, we will be looking at this on Thursday night. So we'll move to the recommendation process, please. Any more discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. And thank you, Paul, for coming in.
Thanks, Ed.
Now, number 3, Electoral Area A, zoning bylaw amendment RZ 1A 1955 hectare underdeveloped parcel, Upper Island Development Limited, a report for receipt. Moving second on receipt. Over staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Jody McLean, Rural Planner, is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, the Chair and Directors. So this parcel we're looking at is a 55 hectare undeveloped lot in the Union Bay settlement node. Page 7 of your package there will show an air photo that provides some relative context of where it's located. It's currently zoned country residential, which allows for it to be subdivided down to 2 hectare lots with 2 houses each. However, the applicant would like to rezone it to allow for it to be subdivided down to 0.36 hectare lots, which they estimate could create about 114 new parcels. Rezoning applications also require submissions of rainwater management plans. The applicant did that. And so according to that, the proposal also involves the regional district taking on covenants to achieve rainwater management objectives and the lack of public drainage system there. Subdivision also involves dedication of at least 5% parkland or cash in lieu. And in this case, the applicants identified some suitable park areas, expanding the Ravine Nature Park and some greenway corridors. So this is consistent with the settlement node designation, which encourages residential intensification. And so staff is recommending this proceed to external agency referral to those listed in Appendix A of your package, and engaging with the applicant on community amenities pursuant to the official community plans, community amenity contributions policy. Mr. Chair, in attendance, we have the applicants, Mr. Andrew Saxton, who is representing the owners, Upper Island Developments, also their engineer, Mr. Hal Martin, and online is their planner, Kevin Brooks. Mr. Chair.
Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning, Chair Grieve, Directors Arbor and Hamir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and my team the opportunity to present to you this morning. I'd also like to thank Scott Smith and his team in planning, Ton and Jody, who have worked very hard to get us to this stage that we're at today. So they've been extremely cooperative and helpful in this process. I'll begin by giving you a brief outline, some background and history of the property, my involvement with it. I will then pass the talking stick over to Kevin Brooks, our planner, who will talk about the proposed zone. And then Hal Martin, our engineer, will talk about some of the engineering issues that he's been working on. First of all, I thought I'd just give you some of my own background and my family background. My grandparents moved to the Comox Valley in 1919, just over 100 years ago. My grandfather, Dr. Christie, was the town dentist, and he practiced here for over 50 years. My grandmother, Mabel Christie, was a trustee on the school board for 27 years as well. My mother was born and raised in this area, and I was born in Vancouver, but I spent many summers here growing up. I also have a home in the Croto Beach area, so I'm a constituent of Director Hamir as well. This property was purchased by my uncle in 1970, so it's been in the family for almost 50 years. My uncle Harold Christie developed the west side of Garvin Road in his lifetime. And so he's left me to develop the rest. So I'm the second generation working on this property. When I took over the responsibility of the property, I thought long and hard about what would be the best use of the property. And I wanted to create something which is really special. And I decided that to create a sustainable community where people have enough land they can grow their organic vegetables, they can have small farm animals, they can have chickens and bees, live off the land if they so choose, be very close to nature with an abundance of walking trails, hiking trails, cycling trails, and also, just have the opportunity to be part of a community. And so in deciding what the best size lots would be, we determined that 1 acre lots are big enough to allow this type of activity, but they're also small enough that you see your neighbors, and so it creates a type of a community. And I remember when I mentioned this to Director Arbor, he said that he understands that because he lives on a similar size lot, and that's more or less what happens in your area as well. So I think we have a great opportunity here to do something really special for the area. It's a big property, and it gives me an opportunity to leave something that's going to be special for Union Bay. It's also going to create economic opportunities. When you think about it, it's probably a 10-year project. It's not going to happen overnight. And over that time, there will be opportunities for economic development and economic growth in the area, and a lot more employment as well. So that is my vision. I want to create a model of a sustainable community, something that others can be proud of, people who live there can be proud of, and we can all be proud of. I'd now like to pass the talking stick over to our planner, Kevin Brooks, who's online on Zoom, and he will talk to you about the proposed zone.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can everybody hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Director Grieve. So thank you, the chair and directors for having us today. Thank you, Andrew. It's been a wonderful opportunity to work with the staff at the RD to look at this draft proposal look at the opportunities to find some mutual goals and benefits for the development of this lands that fall within the settlement node. What we've done working with Mr. Crew and Mr. McLean is look at the existing R1 zone in the regional district and base a proposed zone on that R1 zone with the goal of trying to meet some of the key challenges. And Mr. McLean, Jody had mentioned some of that, specifically with rainwater management in a zone that really ticked off the boxes that the RD needs to meet, but also meet some of the goals of Mr. Saxton. What we're looking at is really a transition from the larger rural lots that you find to the south to a semi-rural transition from the lands just outside of the settlement node and transitioning to the smaller lots that you'll find in the actual village core to the north of the site. So what we have proposed is a 1 acre lot that enables some flexibility for the servicing of those lots if servicing is provided in the future. Part of the challenge that we were looking at when having conversations and discussions with the staff is how to deal with that rainwater management. And what we've proposed is a minimum area of tree retention on every lot. We've also proposed a maximum area of impervious surface, again, to enable water penetration on every lot. And also the requirement that all detailed design and planning for the rainwater management must be completed prior to subdivision in a detailed manner that meets the key aspects of the MOTI standards and also meets the needs of the regional district when looking at a proposal of this nature. One of the other things, and Mr. McLean had mentioned it, we have begun conversations with Mr. Harrison from the Parks Department in regards to parkland and where parkland would be appropriate for this parcel. Through my discussions with Mark, we identified that the desire for a north-south wildlife corridor connector at minimum 20 meters wide, some additional pedestrian connectivity to ensure people that can use this site and move through the site in an efficient manner, walking dogs and exercising, active living, and also providing some additional lands around Ravine Nature Park, which Mr. McLean had talked about. What we have proposed is the 20-meter wildlife corridor that you can see on the western portion of the property. This is proposed in this location for the opportunity that if development does occur to the west, that the RD has an opportunity to actually widen that wildlife corridor. We have a proposed 6-meter wide east to west connection between the Ravine Park to the west. We have a 10-meter north-south connection directly to the ENN rail line. And we are also proposing an additional approximately 2 acres around the Ravine Nature Park to actually create a buffer around the actual environmentally sensitive areas with some additional land adjacent to that to actually allow for a trail to connect the ENN rail line around Ravine Park without actually impacting the environmentally sensitive areas within that. Right now, we're proposing about 5.5% park dedication at this time. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague Hal to provide some greater detail, specifically with regards to servicing.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Hal.
Hi. Hal Martin, consulting engineer. Following on Kevin's presentation, I just want to touch briefly on some typical concerns and also on servicing matters. Firstly, I just want to note that in addition to those here today, our development team includes also Caroline Rutledge, a professional biologist with Valley Environmental, and Eric Galt, a professional engineer with Wedler Engineering. Caroline prepared the biophysical assessment report, and Eric prepared the conceptual stormwater management report, which reports were submitted to support the application. Also, Dale McCartney is providing us with some real estate and marketing advice. So that's our team at the moment. One point of clarification vis-a-vis the staff report, it refers to seeking a minimum lot size designation of 0.36 hectares. which is a little under 1 acre, about 0.9. Conceptual layout plan does contain 2 lots at that size, and the table confirms that. However, the plan has not been fully finalized, and we will be looking at 0.4 hectares as the minimum lot size. And that is primarily to deal with island health criteria for on-site storage systems and piped water. The Union Bay Improvement District has advised us that the community water service is available for the scale of development proposed. We plan to extend from the existing piped system at the end of the developed section of Green Avenue along Green and into the site along the proposed access and through the site. The proposed lot size of 0.4 hectares minimum with piped water supports the provision of private on-site sewerage systems. Available technology for such systems will ensure quality wastewater treatment for many years, certainly until the inevitable development of a public community wastewater collection system within the settlement area. The stormwater management concept is based on controlling increased post-development runoff from smaller, more frequent storms as close to the source of the increased runoff as possible, which is to say, on each individual lot. With proposed limits on the removal of natural vegetation and creation of impervious surfaces, the majority of the increased runoff will come from building roofs. The principles of the water balance model and BC stormwater planning guidebooks best management practices will inform the drainage design and help to minimize downstream impacts. The staff report and Wedler's stormwater management report refer to small community ponds on each lot. However, there are other best management practices which can be designed and employed to provide in-ground detention storage, rain gardens, and rainwater capture for reuse. This will be the choice of individual lot developers to suit their proposed site development plans as mandated in the proposed zoning bylaw. The road system proposed includes connections for future extensions north into the Comox First Nation lands and south through Section 6. Further to the staff report, we have already obtained a license of occupation from the Crown to provide 20-meter wide access from Green Avenue to the west boundary of the property. Provisions of the proposed bylaw with respect to retention of tree cover and limitation of impervious surfaces on lots will benefit the environment, both terrestrial and aquatic, as well as the downstream water quality. Park dedications as proposed will also maintain and enhance the natural environment. We see this development as having predominantly positive impact on the existing community. As the plan shows, while the project seems sizable, the timeline for development will be dictated by market absorption of the new lots. A phased approach is proposed with an expected absorption of 10 to 15 lots per year, suggesting a build-out timeline of about 8 to 10 years. The development will include numerous housing options with carriage house, second dwelling, and secondary suite potential, offering both rental and multi-generational living opportunities. The servicing and building phases will offer job opportunities for both Union Bay residents as well as the broader Comox Valley. New residents of the neighborhood will be future patrons of local Union Bay businesses, both existing and those expected in the commercial sections of Union Bay estates. Upon completion, the road network will provide linkages into the village core, and in concert with proposed development to the south on Section 6, there will be a road link from Highway 19A all the way to McLeod Road. The same road link will provide quick access to Highway 19A for both northbound commuters to the Courtney Comox and for those headed to the Inland Island Highway and points south. In summary, we believe the creation of this residential neighborhood will have a positive impact on the hamlet of Union Bay and will provide a lasting benefit within Area A. Collectively, we thank you for your time and attention and would be pleased to take any questions.
Thank you very much. That brings us to questions from directors. Director Hamir.
Thank you, and thank you for all the presentations. I think my question was probably for Mr. Martin, if you don't mind, around the rainwater retention and septic fields and how those two would mesh on 1 acre lots. Like, do you see that really hampering where the house can go. Are the soils in that area fairly uniform? How do you see that kind of proceeding?
We haven't done any detailed soil investigation on this particular site, but the general area, we have done test pits on the property to the south. And generally in that area, I couldn't give you an exact depth, but there's a shallow overburden, probably up to 24, 30 inches. And that generally overlies a fairly dense till. Mm-hmm. Septic systems, we expect there's going to be enhanced engineering involved in the septic systems. Conventional septic systems are probably not ideal in this location, but enhanced septic systems and design, you can handle on-site sewage for residential uses on almost any soils with the available technology that's out there today. And as far as its relationship to rainwater management, the existing hydrologic regime is generally the water is falling on that shallower overburden layer. It gets into it. If that gets saturated, it does run on the surface to some degree. And anything we can do with those short duration intense storms to put that water back into that upper layer and let it maintain that hydrologic regime is a benefit.
No, I totally agree. And I like the fact that you did reference rain gardens and trying to infiltrate as much as possible. When it comes to climate change, we are seeing those very intense storms that are coming. We seem to be having drier winters, but then when the storms come, just heavy, heavy rains. Has that impacted your calculations as to what size of an area is required for infiltration?
We haven't gotten into heavily detailed calculations at this point, but certainly current technique, or not techniques, but current criteria and what is out there as far as Ministry of Transportation guidelines for drainage design and whatnot is whatever's current. Mm-hmm. The increased intensity we're allowing for highways includes an allowance for climate change. They expect us to allow for an increase in runoff due to climate change, and we're taking that into account.
Great, thanks. My last question is more regards to septic and sewer. If it was made available in your area, would that be a consideration of hookup into a south sewer system, or are you committed to sort of on-site septic?
I would suggest that, and this is obviously subject to Andrew's thoughts, but as the landowner, but I would think that if there was a community sewerage system, that it would make eminent sense to have these lots included in that. And one of the reasons I think that there's a variety of lot sizes in this CD zone that we're proposing, things smaller than 0.4 of a hectare, that is available in that bylaw, and that is looking forward to the idea that perhaps if there was a sewerage system, then people could come back and perhaps subdivide those lots down a little smaller if they wanted to.
We're looking at the best way to deal with septic and sewer. If there is a sewerage system available, then definitely we would want to hook into it. My experience in the area is that these things take a lot of time. And so down the road, that's why we're doing it in phases as well. But down the road, even if we start with septic, they could be converted later to sewer as well. I know that on Garvin Road, there are septic systems on much smaller lots. I mean, those are 0.4, 1/3 to 0.4 of an acre. And they have had some issues, obviously, but those are much smaller lots. I mean, these are 3 times the size of that. And with the engineered systems these days, you can put a septic system in a lot of places you couldn't do it even 10 years ago. So we would look at putting in state-of-the-art septic systems with the opportunity of connecting to a sewer system at a later date if possible.
Yes, like you say, these kind of community amenities like sewer systems take a long time for them to develop. But obviously you haven't met Director Arbor, who's getting all kinds of work done. Director Arbor?
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. It was really good to see the ideas and the transition, I guess, from what will be a somewhat urban to rural. So it seems to fit well with the location of the property inside the RGS. Probably some of my questions to staff are higher level questions, which some of them have already been discussed in regards to servicing, but you know, I think what from a master planning perspective for Union Bay, I'm really curious as to what kind of conversations we're having with Comox First Nations in regard to DL7, because a lot of the connectivity that would be provided to downtown Union Bay, if you will, would likely come through that lot. You know, right now to access your property, you have to go up the hill, make a left like it's, I don't see a lot of people walking or biking the distance. Whereas if 5th Street and 4th Street and 6th Street provided that connectivity. So I just we haven't, anyways, in my term, we haven't had any kind of report around Comox First Nations plans for this other parcel. I do like that you have one point of connectivity to it, but I'd be curious to see if there's a way to synergize and harmonize the approach on those properties, because they potentially could have quite a bit of density, both of them. You've already explained your intent around yours. Because yeah, the decisions made today on the layout will be there for a long time, and the decision on servicing as well, that would be my caution as feedback, that if we put in septic field, what we're discovering, part of why it's taking so long for a septic, a sewer system to happen, is that many people, once they have a septic, they are not very interested in moving to a community sewage solution. And I would hate for the sustainable development in 30 years from now to run into the exact problems that we are facing in the rest of the area with failed septics. And even though we know with Allen Health, the regulations have improved a lot, the systems have improved, but that would still, I would not assume that residents at that time may be willing to fork out another 15, 20, 25,000 if they've already invested 20, 30,000 in a septic field. I do have a question about so going back to my first point around that connectivity to the rest of Union Bay, are you envisioning that you would put in the entire road network as we sometimes see, or in phase one, would you just cut the first road into the phase one property?
Okay, it would be done in phases. Phase one, and I just want to say that phase two would likely be the blue area. I think it's listed as a different phase. See, I also own the property to the south, which is section 6. It's about 100 acres. And so my goal is to hook up the road system as soon as possible to section 6, because that gives an extra access and egress to the property just to the south. So what I would do is I would follow phase one with the road, and then phase two would be the light blue area connecting down to what eventually becomes Bray Road and Garvin down below. Yeah. But that would be the second phase. Just to address your question also regarding Comox Nation, I've been in close communication with Comox Nation, and we've spoken about this. And the indications that I got, the initial indications, is that they were actually quite, at least in cooperation. So that's what gave us, first of all, the idea of where to put the road to the north. That came out of our discussions with Comox First Nation. And so there's a good chance that we may do something in cooperation together with them. It just depends on their timeline, that's all. But certainly, even if it happened later, we could still make it a cohesive development plan.
That's great, thank you. That timeline was perfect segue to my question to staff, which is if this was a move forward today, what would be the next steps from the RD perspective in terms of both timing and actual next steps?
Thank you, Mr. Director Harper. So if this proceeds today, we'll send out a referral package, everything we've gotten from the applicants to the Comox First Nation, among the other agencies listed on the Appendix A, and await their feedback, and that provide us some indication of how it fits within their overall vision. I'm not sure how far they've gotten along with the master plan this time.
Thank you. And then pending that, we would consider a public hearing, or is this within the existing? Yeah.
Yeah, after we gather the feedback from the agencies, we'd have to come back to the regional board here to provide you that feedback. And at that time, we would be looking at a proposed draft zone that would illustrate more detailed regulations about how this would unfold.
I would like to just add just one quick thing to that, if that's possible. Obviously, this file will also go to the advisory AAPC for their comments too.
Yeah, thank you. So it's, in a few months, well, we'll get the referrals back, and then if there was hearing and all that, we're looking at a few months process. I'm just trying to time it with, we have Chris LaRose in the room, and by then he will have great news about our South Sewer project, maybe.
It's not South Sewer anymore, remember?
It's Bain Sound Sewer, or what's the name now? Let's officialize it today.
Services for
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I think for today, that's a great presentation, and I think it puts it on the table for us to consider. So I'd like to thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'm just looking at the referral list, and it's got the adjoining First Nations, BC, but under provincial ministries and agencies, just BC assessment and Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure. And I'm just wondering why Forest Lands and Natural Resources aren't in there, because as you probably know by one of our upcoming agenda items, they've been very active in this area, sometimes without any knowledge of us. Just wondering if they're going to be part of the referrals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We can include Flinro if you want us to. We can add that, and we can send them the package too.
Yeah, because as I say, I'm just referring to the history of Flinro and this area. Thank you. We're okay to go. Well, certainly I'll thank you guys for coming in and for zooming in and bringing us up to speed on this. I heard a lot of hubbub about it over the past few months. It's good to actually see how it's transpiring and coming out. So I excuse you both from the table while we take a vote on receipt. So on receipt, all those in favor? That carries. And the recommendation, if somebody move it? Seconded. Any further discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, I'll call a question on that. All in favor? That carries. We'll see where it goes from here. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Number 4, Electoral Area A Development Permit, DP3A20 and DP4A20, Shoreline Protection, Coal Hills, Island Highway, West Fraser Mills Limited in the province of British Columbia. Moving second on receipt. And over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Jody McLean will introduce this report as well and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Also online, we have the applicants standing by. They'll provide some more detailed information. Pages 9 and 10 of your package will illustrate, the concept a little better here. So this is a development permit under the Shoreline Protections Guideline. This is established for the purposes of protecting the natural environment, ecosystems, and biological diversity, and for the protection of development from hazardous conditions. While staff normally approves these types of development permits, the guidelines require board review them when proposing any armoring of the shoreline. So that's why it's here today. The applicants are seeking to address acid rock drainage and metal leaching coming from the Union Bay coal hills by capping the stockpile with a liner to prevent rainwater from draining through. Instead, the water would be directed on top of the liner in trenches to outlets at the shoreline. The shorelines are being altered with protection devices for keeping the remaining coal in and protecting the edges of the liner from erosive forces. The guidelines discourage hardening of the shoreline, such as vertical walls made of like concrete seawalls or sloped revetments made of riprap, due to their interruption of the natural processes such as sediment transfer and habitat. Instead, soft shore measures that maintain or restore these natural processes are encouraged. These measures often include regrading of the beach and the backshore area to allow for energy dissipation of the wave run-up and anchored logs and vegetation to absorb some of the energy while supplying nutrients and habitat. The applicants prepared a report by a coastal engineer to explore opportunities for soft shore measures that can achieve the containment system's necessary level of safety. According to the report, soft shore measures on the eastern facing shore, that's the side facing Union Bay and Denman Island, any soft shore measures there would require an excessive amount of ongoing maintenance due to the prevailing wind and wave directions. It would require continual refilling of the beach for the wave energy dissipation. The report did confirm that soft shore measures are possible on the north side, and they provided a design accordingly. On the western facing side, facing the creek, soft shore measures were ruled out due to the proximity of the neighboring lot right across the watercourse, which wouldn't allow for regrading that channel. So the applicants are proposing soft shore design on the north end, flanked by hardened riprap on the sides. They're also proposing to offset some of the impacts to the habitat by adding dune grass in the gaps in the riprap and by restoring 660 square meters of intertidal marsh. This is a long-term project scheduled to begin next year and will involve ongoing maintenance of the site in the foreshore. On the line is Dave Langill and Richard Johns of the Keystone Environmental, the applicants, as well as I've lost the names there. Joanna Ronells, I believe, of the province, and Antonio also, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Questions from the directors? Director Hamir.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation to staff. My question is around that hardening and the impact that the hardening would have north and south of the project area. I don't know if the applicants have could speak to that, like what we've seen when hardening of shoreline happens, for example, around the Willamar Bluffs, there were some unintended consequences. And so if the applicants could speak to what they're potentially expecting from having that hardening of the shoreline.
Yeah, this is Richard Johns from Environmental. It would actually be our marine engineers that would be best suited to speak to the exact nature of that, but I will do my best here to answer your question. So from the main sound, the east side of the site, the primary direction of the waves action, it actually ends up pushing a lot of the material to the north of the site. So I don't know if you can see on that drawing there, they have the previous lot boundaries that came out into Bain Sound. And now a lot of that material has pushed north, closer to where the northern side of the soft shore side will be. So that's the anticipated change by having this shoreline protection device on the east side. We're gonna see less of that change in the landscape.
So would you expect more like erosion off of that northern site then, if the wave energy isn't being dissipated by that hard riprap? Will that energy then be impacting that northern shoreline?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So I'm wondering if if we can anticipate any kind of erosion or deposition even on the northern side of the project?
So historically, that's where the deposition was happening, but it was eroding from the east side and depositing to the north. And so we're going to see less of that going forward. And that's what we want. We want to protect the coal pile. Excuse me. We want to protect that side so we're not seeing that erosion and deposition anymore. So we're going to see less of that going forward. We will be continuously monitoring the shoreline. There will be regular inspections out there to make sure that material isn't being removed that would undermine the shoreline protection in any way. It is going to be keyed down into the below the current level of the sand, the silt in that area, so that it does protect that from that migration in future. The area that we could potentially still see some migration, and that's been built into the design, excuse me, is the northern side. So we could see some of the sand layer that we place in that area. We could see some movement of that. And based on the recommendations from the marine engineer, we're placing enough sand in that area such that it would be sufficient for at least 50 years before there would need to be any replacement in that area.
Okay,
that was based on the currents and the storm, etc. wave action.
Thank you very much for that. Director Arbor.
Thank you. I don't think I have so much question as a comment, in that I'm so pleased to see this project move forward. It's one of the Comox Valley was built around coal, and Union Bay was chosen as a port and processing place for coal. And Cumberland became a municipality. Union Bay never did, so they just inherited that big negative externality, and it's been sitting there ever since. So it's really wonderful to see that we are, not the CVRD is playing a very, very small part, but it's very nice to see the province, West Fraser Mill, step in to address this site. And I boat by it all the time. So it is, I've looked, it's not very alive around it. It's one of the, I think it ranks in the top 10 or top 20 toxic sites in BC. So I only have, perhaps my only question would be, are you guys in a position to give us any guidance on the timeline around when you would anticipate to both conduct this hardening and as well on the rest of the project around the capping?
Yes, I can speak to the timeline. The current timeline, it is primarily based on a lot of the permitting right now. We do have additional permit applications going through with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and with Forest Lands as well, Ministry. So based on those all coming through in our time period here, as we expect, the plan is to start work on the pile capping itself in spring 2021, and we would be looking to get to the shoreline protection closer to the end, like the fall of 2021. That's when the majority of that would take place, to finish up before the end of 2021. That's the current timeline.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, to continue on from that, there's still going to be time for the grass to grow in place where it'll need to be protected and such to prevent any erosion. And there will still be continual monitoring on from that period of both the offset area and the cap and the shoreline protection itself.
Thank you. And if we approve this and all your permits come through, just remember to send us an invite to the ribbon cutting ceremony.
Sounds good. We'll do.
Dr. Hamir?
Right, thank you. And I apologize for also not congratulating you on the scope of this project. Having seen the impact of the capping of Mount Washington, like this is just a win for the Comox Valley. So thank you for bringing this forward. My question was for staff. On pages 7 and 8, I'm just noticing the boundary of the property goes into the water. Is that a historical, like where the property line was? Because I'm just wondering I'm assuming it's because of the erosion that the boundary is probably in water now. And is that still the case, that technically that's where the boundary is?
Yeah, a lot of historical dumping has occurred here, which may have altered where the shoreline naturally exists. I'm not positive of when that line was drawn. That's the parcel that's 100% Crown owned. Yeah, that's as far as I know, unless the agents do know the history behind that end of the coal pile.
I also cannot speak to the timeline when those district lots were surveyed, but my understanding that was the edge of the land at that time, and I'm not sure on the dumping, but I do know from the erosional forces itself, and that's why you've definitely seen on page 8, you've definitely seen the east side cut back. And there's on that side right now, there's cliffs as high as 4 meters on that side where the water has been cutting in, and then that point on the northeast corner, that's definitely been being added to over the time period.
Okay, so just as staff, like when we have something like this where over time the action of nature has really changed the lot, whose responsibility is it to adjust the lot lines?
It automatically gets adjusted when they resurvey, at least for when it's a private property. When it comes down to where it's private and where it's Crown, because that line is the shoreline at present natural boundary at the time of the survey. In terms of this, as both sides are Crown, it may not get resurveyed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just didn't want to be responsible for that. Thank you.
Arbor?
Just while I have you guys on the line, in case I have those conversations on the islands, is there any components to that that's going before the Islands Trust as well in terms of permitting or anything like that? I know their jurisdiction extends quite a bit into Bain Sound. And
sorry, in terms of which?
The Islands Trust. Do you guys have any? You're all shaking your head like no. Because I know their jurisdiction extends quite a bit out into Bain Sound. So hey, if it's not on your list, it's not on your list. That's okay. But I may be right, as our chair says. So I'll probably just flip for awareness to their trustees, your plans in the document. Thank you.
All right, appreciate that.
A couple of questions. When we talk about DL 155 and DL 154, these are the subject properties. So it's listed that they're now owned by Flinro, right? Now, does West Fraser have a stake in this as well? Because of the concurring pollution that goes on for generations and generations? I just wonder how that works.
Yes, I mean, I've been fairly brief. I haven't, oh, sorry, my apologies.
Oh, go ahead, Richard.
No, you go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I've been fairly brief just to answer your specific questions, but there is a lot of history here, as you're aware. West Fraser was a tenant on the Crown property, and the West Fraser essentially inherited this property when they took on, it was a purchase back of the Weldwood forest products back in the day. Yeah. That's how they became involved. And so they are currently they are our client to design and implement this cap. And then it, once that is constructed and in place, then it does transfer over to the ministry for future monitoring and maintenance.
Okay, I just remember about 10 years ago when this was slated to be the 18th hole of a golf course. And then to our surprise, we woke up in the morning to find that Flynn Road made a deal and our master development agreement was nulled and void, and it was a whole new ball game. Not to take away from the fact that this work needs to be done, but my question is it the province of BC then is going to be footing this bill?
You want Keystone to speak to that?
Sure, because you know, what's your take on it?
So no, I mean, it is West Fraser that is paying for, as I said, the design and implementation of this cap and the shoreline protection and all the works. So West Fraser is paying for that, and then it is after it is complete, then it will transfer over to the province, to the ministry.
Will there be money exchanging hands to compensate West Fraser for some of this?
I don't believe I'm at liberty to speak to any of the agreements in place.
Yeah, there's been a lot of lack of information on this site for many years. Well, like I say, not to take away from the fact that this work does need to be done. Does anybody know what the province is planning on doing with those two parcels then? Is it going to be made available for the public? Is that the concept? I can ask our staff that one. Thank you,
Mr. Chair. So staff had some discussions with the province in regards to this proposal, but their intended use in the future. And their goal is to allow this to, this property will be allowed, the public will be allowed to use this property as more of a walking trail. And any recreational use.
Okay, that's good news. Thank you. And Director Hamir.
Great, thank you. And sorry, this just occurred to me. I'm wondering if either Keystone or staff can confirm, do we have any shellfish licenses close by that could be impacted by some of the activity that's happening on this site? And if so, would we be giving them the heads up of when this activity happens?
As staff, I'm not aware of any shell licensing in that area.
Yeah. And for Keystone, what do you do in terms of monitoring like sedimentation? If you start stirring up any sediment in the water, what kind of monitoring do you do around that?
In general, and I might get Dave to provide more comment. So we will have a full-time, first of all, the contractor will have their own environmental monitor on site full-time, and they will be needing to meet trigger limits of any turbidity, total suspended solids that is coming off the property. So they are supposed to keep that to a minimum during the work. And if in the event that they do trigger one of those limits, then they have to put additional measures in place to address that. And furthermore, Keystone Environmental will have a monitor on site who is monitoring them on behalf of our clients to make sure that they are taking the correct mitigation measures if they do have any increase in sediment. But the plan is to keep it within those trigger limits.
Well, I wonder if staff could just look into if we do have some shellfish folks, just to give them a heads up, because I think that's only fair that they know.
Yeah, I'm still surprised that Director Arbor mentioned the fact that the Island Trust actually has jurisdiction up to the high tide mark on Vancouver Island, so they should be on the referral as well. Any comment on that?
To the chair, With this application, there is no referrals or no public consultation in regards to the shoreline protection device. But we can reach out to their shellfish industry to inform them that this is coming their way.
A matter of courtesy, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And on top of that too, just for this committee, staff is in discussion with United States right now in regards to some type of shoreline protection device on their property, which will be the south end of this property that will be connected to the boat ramp. So the application has not been forwarded to this committee yet, but we are in discussion with them, and we have been informing them to contact the province in regards to somehow connecting the proposal together.
Director Arbor.
That's great. I'm just thinking, I'm revisiting my idea to send it to the trustees. Would it be appropriate for you guys to flip this to Island Trust planning staff as well, just as a heads up? Thank you.
Yeah, this is not a public document since it's on our agenda, so we can.
Yeah, it's amazing how often the Island Trust is surprised by things because they may not have seen it or whatnot. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't come as a big surprise later on.
Yes, we definitely can.
Thank you.
Yes, we have had our share of surprises around this piece of property. Anything else? Any further questions on receipt? Seeing none, I'll call a question on receipt. All those in favor? And that carries. Recommendation 1, please. Move the second on 1. Any further discussion? Seeing none on recommendation 1, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. And 2? Seconded on 2. Seeing no lights, call the question on 2. All in favor? And that carries as well. Thank you. I'm going to take this opportunity to take a quick recess and stretch our legs. So we'll be back in 8 to 10 minutes. And we are on item 5, which is COVID-19 response renewable for the electoral areas. Move receipt and seconded on receipt.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. James Warren is here to briefly present this report. We also have a number of our managers that are here to answer questions with respect to the various services that are covered.
Thanks, Russell. Through the CIO and to the directors, thank you for taking the time today. So you'll remember in May of 2020, the board approved a response and renewal framework to dig into all the different services and projects that the CVRD is involved in, and look for ways in which to adjust those services, to collaborate more strongly with some of our partners, to find cost reductions, to be able to present to the board a response and renewal framework or plan that can find some of those outcomes. Today's report covers services that are considered solely by the electoral area directors, and that includes water, fire protection, land use planning, parks, emergency programs. And you'll see from the report that it is structured to highlight those EA services that are necessary and critical, many of which continue through the pandemic unimpeded. Services like water supply and distribution and fire protection could not be stopped, though of course some operational adjustments did have to be made over the last number of months. The renewal actions specific to your services are named in the appendices and can be explored in more detail today with the staff who are present. But I did want to provide a few highlights and arrange those statements around the board's focus to rethink Comox Valley. So firstly, keeping services affordable. Under the Liquid Waste Management Plan service, there are no planned taxation increases, and the service operates almost entirely through grant funding. The bulk water rate decreases means nearly $50,000 in savings over the coming years. In parks, a 13% reduction from the budget values is proposed because of canceled capital projects and reduced operational spending. And in the emergency program service, nearly $10,000 in savings is a result of the canceled earthquake exercise that was scheduled for this fall, and that's to the electoral area services alone. Secondly, streamlining processes. Significant process improvements are proposed in the Planning and Development Services branch, and the changes would include simplified development permit requirements and merging bylaw compliance functions. In parks, looking at a Comox Valley-wide approach to service delivery with community partners is a potential outcome. Thirdly, protecting quality of life. A focus on infrastructure maintenance and asset management in the water systems and the LWMP service means that services can be delivered consistently and responsibly, and enhanced partnerships with community organizations and municipalities, thinking specifically to the emergency management and regional EOC, means that we can continue to respond to events such as the global pandemic, should we see a second wave and other type of incidents. And then finally, caring for the community. And this again relates to partnerships with community organizations. And that is the key to caring for the most vulnerable in our communities. The experience with our regional EOC and understanding how best to improve upon that experience will mean that more needs are being met. So Mr. Chair, staff are available to explore any of the materials that are part of the appendices or in the report itself and have a further discussion.
Director Hemier.
Great, thank you. And thanks, James, for the presentation and the report. I'm really glad to see that, we've done such a thorough look at all of the services for electoral areas. And over the summer months, I participated in a community sort of conversation around the impacts of COVID. And it was really interesting to hear how critical, I think, garbage and septic and water are things that people forget. It's just there. And so they don't consider those services as essential, even though they are. But how critical parks came up in the community conversation as necessary for community health and well-being, both mental and physical. So I just wanted to ask around, the parks budget. I would hate to see any kind of curtailing of the budget that would impact accessibility to parks. do staff think that there might be any kind of limitations for the public on park use if we cut any kind of budget?
So I think this is where I look to some of the staff to help
Yeah.
us with that. So Mark Harrison, if you're able to consider that.
That on? Hello? Yeah. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
No.
Is that good? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, to Director Mayor, thank you for your question and for appreciating the importance that parks has played, especially during COVID, in terms of having a place for people to be socialize and have mental health, and also, you know, for the physical well-being. What we've proposed here, that's not going to have any impact in terms of accessibility into the parks. A lot of it is capital projects that can largely be deferred. But really, it's a question of what kind of service level do the directors want to provide in the parks. But nothing in here talks about accessibility. In fact, there is some kind of talk in there about maybe extra funding or shifting some funding towards land acquisition, so we can actually maybe increase the availability of parks.
Yeah, I would be in favor. While you're there, if I can follow up another question. I'm looking at park maintenance, and I know you've already got some great partnerships. I've seen them in Seal Bay, and I was on that fantastic walk with the youth environmental group in at the Goose Pit. So I'm wondering if, and looking at kids going back to school, I know there's a big worry in September of how SD 71 is going to, you know, roll that out. I'm wondering if parks maintenance is something that we could look at partnering with SD 71, especially with some of the older kids, having, you know, them participate in maintaining public parks as a way of education, physical fitness. Has that ever been looked into?
Yeah, no, thanks for your question. As far as I know, that hasn't been explored. I think one thing to kind of consider is that the partnerships that we have, I think they're really great, but you also need to consider that the staff time and the resources involved to get people up to speed, to train them to get to a certain quality. And when you have students that are constantly rotating, it's a huge drain on our staff resources to make that happen.
Sure. I totally understand that. Having had some of these kids come to our farm and try and be productive on a farm, having untrained people. But just want to put it out there, if there is an opportunity for us to partner with the school district for productive work and to get kids outside again. My last question was more on the water, bulk water. Can I just confirm, did we move to the card system for our bulk water purchasing? Did that get implemented?
Yes, so it's in the process of being finalized right now. So communication went out to the holders of the keys up until now, letting them know that we're in a transition phase, and there was a deadline for submitting an application for the FOB, or the card system, that will be in place shortly. So the COVID has had some impact on the timeline for getting the system connected to the city of Courtenay, but we're weeks away, and the transition is underway.
Yeah. Director Arbor.
Thank you. Have quite a few. Is Mark still? No, he's gone. He's fighting somewhere. Yeah, might as well start with parks, I guess. On the bigger side of things, and to be honest, okay, first general comments, for all this report, very thorough and thoughtful, and I went line by line, and I thought it was really good. Like, you guys have really did a great assessment, and I can see a lot of thought has gone into it for everybody. Okay, back to parks. There's two that I just have a general question. You may need to refresh my memory, but the report does speak about the capital works reserve adjustments. But there are two big amounts, which are the strategic plan reserve and the land acquisition reserve. Strategic plan reserve, we're accumulating about 200,000 a year. And land acquisition, about the same amount, just a little over that. And on the land acquisition, we have a draw from that of 200,000 a year. Is that a general projected, or is that tied to an actual debt service?
Yeah, no, thanks for your questions, Director Harbour. The 200,000 that's coming out is just a general to just say that we could possibly spend up to 200,000, but that doesn't have a direct land acquisition project to it. And I think your other questions were talking about was it the difference between the land acquisition reserve and the strategic plan?
Yeah.
So the strategic plan reserve are those that are actually listed as projects within our rural parks and greenway strategic plan. And so if we've got projects that are identified within that plan, then we are allowed to use monies from that reserve. And then the land acquisition is just for land acquisition. So there could be a point that we could use land acquisition reserve and some strategic reserve to actually acquire land if that is a part of a strategic.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
That perfect answer. So my feedback would be, I mean, especially with the strategic plan reserve, we see it in the 5-year plan increasing quite a bit from, I think it's currently sitting at 400 and it will end up at 800. So we're not anticipating a ton of draws from it, perhaps, at current time. The land acquisition just had that assumption of a couple of 100,000, but in both cases, a bit like the hospital conversation about us putting aside large amounts without defined project in the near term, I do wonder if, I mean, in the land acquisition, we currently have 1.3 or 1.4 million sitting there, which is a nice amount. And for the strategic plan, I can't speak to it because I don't have as much the land acquisition. It's more like, you'll buy a big parcel. Strategic plans, probably a number of things, but I did wonder a bit like we did with the hospital, whether, there's 400,000 there that are not particularly defined. So my question would be, is this a case where we can make adjustment, and if opportunities come up, we could requisition or those numbers in future years or something like that? I realize that the park has actually done the biggest job in terms of looking at efficiencies, and I was really impressed by how much money you've identified, but it just sort of happened that when I look at those two amounts for the land acquisition and strategic, whether we wanted to take a COVID pause as well for a year or two, or whether we wanted to keep. In the case of land acquisition, well, in both cases, we don't seem to have a really strong immediate needs for it. And I was wondering if you felt as manager in the land acquisition, if we should continue to put those monies aside based on where the reserves currently sits.
Yeah, thanks, Director Harbour. My personal opinion is that those reserves, although I think it's 1.2, when you actually go to look at buying land that's got ecological value, which is largely, you need larger pieces of land to have a large patch size to give you that ecological value. 1.3 million doesn't really go a long way in this valley right now. So my personal sense is that it's actually on the lower side of what you want to have in there.
So maybe more information on that one I would like in the future is right now we show it as drawing 200,000 a year for 5 years, but what you and I are basically saying is it won't happen like that. We may come across a property that's 2 million. So I guess when I read the 5-year financial plan with a draw of 200,000 a year, that's probably not reflective of what's going to happen. And what may be good for us to consider is if we're feeling that 1.2 is not that significant, then it'd be great to have a target reserve that is well rationalized so that we understand what would have an impact. Because I could play your argument both ways. if you say it doesn't do a lot, well, then I'm like, well, okay, so we'll have to chase money elsewhere anyways. So it doesn't matter what the size of the reserve is because it's too small, you know. So we could argue it both ways. Either we need to grow it appropriately or leave it there as seed money. But I just couldn't see the justification for, and on the strategic plan, maybe that's for a future thing that one I understand would be much more broken up in a number of different strategic priorities and projects. So I'll let that one be, but it was a similar observation that we were going to increase that reserve to about 800,000 over the next few years. And for me, I would still like to understand if that will make a difference to our strategic plan, or whether it's just, like you say, still small game in relation to what the needs may be.
I think with the strategic plan, I think that's a lot more flexible.
Yeah.
So you know, the strategic plan is like putting into place the one spot trail, or you know, other kind of park needs, and those can be a lot more small piece. Whereas I think a land acquisition, you're looking at usually a larger kind of dollar amount. So I agree with you that 200,000 a year is not really reflective of what our needs are in that respect.
Great. And while I have you on the mic, there's a couple more just questions. Was beach fire under you? The cancellation of the program, is that on the parks?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and I was glad to see, you know, to try to create synergies with the recreation department for the next couple of years as people try to do outdoor stuff. But the beach fire, it's set for 2020. Obviously, it's not happening. And then it had a question to revisit it for future years. And just a question about attendance. Has attendance been stable over the years, or has it increased or decreased?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not actually sure. Potentially Doug would know that.
The beach fire, yeah.
I think like all our parks in the valley, attendance has been continuing to grow throughout the years. And the beach fire program, I would say if the fire pits are in place, they are of high demand in the summer months.
Right. Yeah, there was just a quick note as to whether we would continue it in the future, but maybe staff can come back with more information about the options, I guess.
I think if adopting the recommendation in this report, it allows staff to come back, understanding that by adopting that, you're asking us to look into it further and review it. Yes.
Thank you so much, Doug. Sorry, I just have two more, guys, I think. Another one that I'll look forward to hear about is I love those sentences that are kind of more general, but it was the first time that popped. I'll definitely be curious to see about combining the fire protection services. There was some note about that. That's not park, so I shouldn't look at you, but that's the first time I see that one. And the last one maybe that I'll save is on the bylaw enforcement side. It does talk about reducing travel. And this summer, with COVID, it's been really intense on the island. I don't know if you guys have fielded many calls or not, but I've had many conversations with residents saying, you know, the RCMP provides a lot of the stuff that the education and the presence around. And I would not like to see our presence diminish. And in fact, I was even thinking in the summer, for next summer, it'd be nice to have a bit more presence. So I was just wondering, when we were looking at travel and such things, whether you were foreseeing a reduction of presence and education in the rural areas.
So for travel, that would be more around staff traveling to conferences, training, that type of travel. We wouldn't be cutting off the islands. We'd still be accommodating. It is picking up there just recently. This weekend, we have a few noise complaints actually from Hornby, but it's been pretty quiet up until now. But travel will still be accommodated. It would be for extracurricular, for staff training would be looked at.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for indulging me with my detailed look at things, but everything matters, right? And in terms of when constituents come back later on. So I really appreciate the work. I think it's an excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, I think we're going to have to be constantly reassessing this as we move forward because we don't know, as the saying goes, where do we COVID from here? We've got a lot of sensible reductions here. I think it keeps our powder dry because I do believe that we're going to have to be constantly reassessing these things as we move forward. I would say that insofar as park acquisition goes and our parcel tax we charge for parks, most of the big land purchases have come out of the blue because these opportunities present themselves when you least expect it. And I think you know, with the ensuing downturn in the economy that we're all expecting, that there's going to be some people that maybe will be tempted to sell some of these larger pieces that have ecological values and as well as sensitive habitat, as well as lakes and river systems and what have you, that would be a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I would not be in favor. I would be in favor of keeping that requisition going forward and put money away for that inevitability. Other than that, I think this is a good first start. I think because of the very nature of the pandemic, we really have no possible way of foreseeing what's waiting around the corner. So again, I think it's important that right now, I mean, we're collecting our tax requisitions this year as per what we agreed on in committee during budget. We can reassess that next year. We'll know a little more where we're going. And meanwhile, any money we can put into reserve would be there to cushion the worst possible case scenario. So thank you very much for staff for bringing us forward. It's great to see all you folks here, especially Dennis. Hardly ever see Dennis anymore. But yeah, is there any? Yeah, Rosina has one too. So that's all I have to say. I just keep stressing the fact that there's so many unknowns at this point that, you know, for us to make plans, it's the old story, you know, man makes plans and God laughs. Director Mir.
Great, thank you. And like Director Arbor, I had lots of questions, but I'm breaking it up so that everyone's got turns. Since you're standing, if I could ask around the idea of merging some of the bylaw enforcement activities, I'm just a little bit concerned about staff capacity. So would you be able to speak to like any new taking on of responsibilities that were otherwise in another section, or is it the same people?
You're speaking about taking on the water? Yeah. So we realized we're out and about we have two full-time, and they're driving sometimes from, you know, area A all across to maybe Saratoga Beach for something. So in that, and we're also in the parks daily as well, that was a capacity for them to also patrol. They're driving past water infractions, and they kept bringing it up. So thought it as a potential to try it and see if we can accommodate that. We're quite confident we'll be able to. They're out and about anyway, in between our regular calls, and quite often they're probably driving right through areas they could easily be doing patrols and talking to residents on about watering anyway.
Great. Well, I'm glad it's staff who brought it up, and you know, they think they can take it on. So I'd be curious to hear how they are able to keep on top of that. And then my other question was for James on fire. I was just reading about the delays in the Merville Fire Hall, and I don't remember hearing about delays. So I'm wondering if you could sort of just expand on that. Is that COVID related, or what's happened there?
Yes, thank you very much for your question and through the chair. The delays, we have some minor delays, and they were COVID related, particularly with regards to the engineering team and them being able to gather their team together. We do have their team together now, and they are currently providing us with designs. So the project is moving forward, and we're putting the delays behind us, and we're going full steam ahead.
Just in response to Director Hamir's question on the bylaw compliance merger, the concept is mentioned in the report. The in discussions with Kevin Duville and I believe Scott, and there's been some discussion around you have 4 or 5 individual services now with nuisance, unsightly, fireworks, animal control, and 502, which is the land use planning. There is an opportunity likely there to look at, can those be merged under one service, and then you'd have a series of regulatory bylaws under that one service. Not a big change to the public necessarily, but more efficient with our own internal resources and staffing needs. And so that's an area we would look to investigate and bring back. It would require a series of bylaw amendments and exciting stuff like that. But to add to your question about merging those services.
Okay, I see no other speakers.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Director Arbor.
Thank you. It was on my list. I didn't speak to it. Just a quick one on reducing the EOC training by 14,000. So I was wondering, like, if we get a second wave and all that, like, it feels like we were pretty, I mean, it's been very intense last few months. Mm-hmm. And I know there was a training, the fire services, there was one on training on Hornby that's moving forward, the center. But I was curious about why a decision to reduce EOC training at a time where if we enter a second wave and all these different things, or whether you have some information to share that will enlighten me.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Director. The reduction is only because we increased the budget this year to enhance EOC training and do more of it. So we just reduced some of that back to actually above sort of normal training levels. We still are going to do EOC training. What we're going right now is working with our partners like Justice Institute of British Columbia and EMBC to find out how we can do those and keep the social distancing and through Zoom delivery and stuff like that. So we're still trying to figure that stuff out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so we take a vote on receipt. All those in favor? That carries. Recommendation? Moving second on a recommendation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous as well. CBRD Fire Department Operation Guidelines report July 31st for receipt. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And James Bast, Manager of Fire Services, is here to present this report and answer any of your questions regarding operational guidelines.
Hello there. Thank you to the committee and through the chair to the committee. The operational guidelines manual is a confirmation that the fire departments will be working within the parameters of all legislation, all regulations, and so on, bylaws, whether they're at a federal, provincial, or a local level. We provide that it'll be a safe operation, that each firefighter will be able to provide that service and is well trained to do it. The fire departments have always had operational guidelines. This is just a culmination of all of the guidelines to make sure that they fit with all of the current and up-to-date legislation and regulation. And I'm available for any questions.
Director Arbor?
I just want to acknowledge the work, and I did try to read the manual. I couldn't do it. So, it was very, but I do appreciate the work and how important it is. And it is good to see everybody collaborate and kind of streamline things. So thank you for the work.
Okay. Very good then. On receipt, all in favor? Recommendation. Move second on recommendation. Any further comments on the recommendation? All those in favor? That carries. All right, number 7, CVRE grant funding services process recommendations. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And this report will be supported by Doug DeMarzo. He'll provide a brief presentation and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Through the chair to the directors, this is follow-up from, I guess, a report almost last year where we promised to review our grant process, and we're back again with a minor delay in COVID. And as we watch things kind of unfold for a bit to get a better understanding of the grant funding program. So really here today to confirm the guidelines of the new processes for creating criteria for the various grant and funding services offered and administered by the CVRD. On to the next slide, perhaps, Lisa. The CVRD administers several services through which community-based organizations and local governments can receive grant funding. We're really looking to standardize this process and establish criteria for each grant and funding service. This will help provide clarity to the public and the funding recipients, as well as improving the CVRD administration and the various grants and services. We look at your 5 strategic drivers. We look at fiscal responsibility. We feel this process creates a new higher level of transparency and accountability. Looking at the climate crisis environment stewardship lens, again, transparency through a grant and aid process allows for broader community grant funding and the new portal for the future carbon offset grants. We see this as a positive step towards this driver. Community partnerships, I think it goes without saying, this is all based on community partnership, either those being traditional or perhaps even new partners coming into the fold. This also provides our partners more predictable and stable transparency funding moving forward, as you'll see with some of the recommendations coming forth. Really helps support the community knowing they're going to have a consistent funding source. And with Indigenous relations, I think some of the criteria can be considered for many grant opportunities, may encourage working and building relationships with Indigenous peoples. As we move to the next slide, I think it's important to recognize that staff will, from an operational perspective, will be developing the suitable timelines, the criteria to help direct organizations to the appropriate funding stream. We'll continue to help set budgets through our multi-year agreement and outlining expectations through board review of the budget cycles and the ASC review. And it'll allow for approval of grant support to be completed in public meetings of the ASC and the board during the budget process, and those expectations spoken about through there. One thing you will note is, for example, community funds, works funds, and heritage services are excluded from some of this process here, mostly because heritage services, this needed to be in place in order for the service to actually work. So we ended up not bringing it into the grant fold, which we might have noted earlier on. And with community works funds, we are making a recommendation that it is not a public process to be applied to, instead be more for internal projects or discretionary director projects. But with that in mind, I'll look at some of our key ones here. From arts and culture, we are looking at long-term within the next 2 years, hopefully, depending on what happens here, a regional review of the program in partnerships with our municipalities. This partly came from the City of Courtenay's report a couple of years ago that looked at some of the benefits of that. So we were looking at supporting that and building on that. But from the grant side, we really want to continue with our operational agreements with those facilities that are kind of brick and mortar based. But we feel we can do that through 5-year operating agreements and have them understand some of, just a better understanding and clarity around some of the processing and transparency and expectations the CVRD may have of granting those grants. And at the same time, it takes some burden off them of submitting budgets and going through that process every single year. So it works well for both sides. So we see 5-year operating agreements within that. But it also creates that opportunity for the porthole for event and capital or special type projects, which the criteria is designed or will be and is designed for will be further refined, and allows that application process through the broad community. And through that, we envision the EASC having final approval on that through the budget process. So the deadlines will be set that it kind of aligns within the budgetary timelines. So it'll really provide opportunities for new applicants to come in with new ideas or events, or even those existing organizations under operational agreements where they feel they have something of significance or major capital thing to also be allowed into that stream, besides just the regular day-to-day business per se of creating great arts and culture opportunities for the community. I'd be happy to discuss the recreation grants at the board meeting, but it follows somewhat of the same process, but I'm happy to take questions about it here, but won't go into too much detail. And again, the grant and aid is another interesting one. We envision this again into the community grants portal and more or less remarketed to be a broad ranging grant. We do feel that there is a number of agreements in there that can be streamlined and again operational. We are suggesting the time cycle be a little different than the 5-year operating cycle, instead be more an election time cycle. And again, they go through the portal into excuse me, a separate accessibility criteria and application process for those more one-off type grants. And in your report, you'll see an attachment of some examples that we see over the last, I think it was back to 2012 to 2020. We just took a look and highlighted some of those. More importantly, or as importantly, perhaps from the grant and aid process, we are looking at bringing the community halls out into their own services. So that'll require working closely with legislative services and looking at potential AAP processes or electoral assent processes moving forward to understand for Area A if what that projection looks like, what those community halls want to be involved. And then that service is there for them to again enter into these more or less 5-year operational agreements is how we would envision it, similar to what we do in Denman and Hornby. And Area C is a little different because they already have the Black Creek. So working with ledge services, we look at either expanding that or recreating that service depending on which makes more sense through the processes. So that's highlights of grant and aid. Again, there's still a lot of discretion involved through the directors, and they have the ability to bring projects forward that don't necessarily meet, or if applicants miss the timeline for the budget review proposal, we're still assuming there will be some funding left for those discretionary type items that may come out of the blue at times. And lastly, we see the climate action grants and those type of air quality initiatives in the past also available and highlighted through this portal. Currently planning as a third party is reviewing some of that spending, but we've created or will be creating the portal to include those in that in the future if so desired. So at the very least at this point, they'll be redirected into those other distribution areas through this portal. Really the portal is about bringing everything into one spot, making it easy for the applicants, making it very transparent for the community to understand where it is. And this process really highlighted that we do have a good process in place. You know, we are hitting a lot of the highlights. So we decided, you know, there wasn't a need to do a major shift to our overall grants. It's more about a few tweaks and a few improvements to make this better for everyone, being administratively and the community. So as we move on, just a quick recap of where we are today. So basically, we've been doing a lot of background research, which is really about getting to where we are today. Started May 9th, 2019, or perhaps arguably long before that, if you may have seen some allusion to some other reports in our report. And then we've done a bit of outreach. We had quite a few grant recipient meetings, primarily with arts and culture groups early on, or I guess late last year. And then we've had a couple of Zoom meetings with the community halls about other things, but also this topic was broached with a number of them as well. So we feel we're on the right track with this. And as we move forward, we have a lot of grant guideline development already done, but it'd be about formalizing that and really bringing it up and creating those portholes internally, moving through the potential new bylaw drafts, which most will probably come through this process, and then launching in 2021. So the interesting part about this is, as we move through the last processes, it might be realistically 2022 until a lot of the public front changes are seen, although there'll be a lot of work if this idea and concept is supported in the background in 2021, which could direct some of these operating agreements and things actually starting as early as 2021, although it might not be so widely announced to the public at that time. So that's what we're outlining. There's quite a bit of information in the staff report, and open to any questions.
Director Arbour.
Thank you for the report. This is on the framework and where you're heading. This is great. When I was in the nonprofit sector, I think I spent 7 years trying to understand how to access CVRD resources. I just could not navigate or understand what was available, what line was which, what could you access, what could you not access. And just to end up with a portal that makes it really clear to everybody will improve transparency, will improve buy-in, and also credit to the CVRD, because I think the credit, in many instances, we fund things and people don't know, or they, because it's all these agreements. Some of them are quite public, others are not. So this portal will really help to bring up the profile and the clarity around our grant processes. I have, as usual, a few comments. For the halls, that's great. I'm personally in favor, but with the garbage and recycling pickup, and with the sewer potentially, and all these things, I'm wondering if that assent process could be contemplated around election time or something like that a little later on. Because if I'm already hearing from constituents saying, "Oh my God, we're." You guys are coming at us with a lot of stuff right now. So that's just a comment that has nothing to do with the halls themselves. It just has to do with the electoral assent context for residents, even though I'm super in support. So anyways, maybe there's just need for more internal staff discussion around how to manage all those. I like the rebranding of grant and aid, because grant and aid makes it seem like we're the Red Cross or something, and we're dropping supplies from helicopters to people. And but I found you came up with a 5 words replacement, and maybe I would suggest as a small adjustment to, I think you called it the rural areas community support grants. So I would just call it rural community grants, and that would probably do it. And the other one that you can probably expect from me from my comments last year is, right now we have, so basically the way I look at it, a few slides back, you had it laid out with the tree, but I just look at it as really you have operations grants, you have program grants, and then the third type is capital contributions. And I think it's great work around the operation program, and the capital on the community works funds. I totally appreciate the view of staff on this. But I would use the example of a recent one that we did, because the way I'm just exerting caution, because the way it frames it right now is it says we will consider, well, first of all, we will prioritize internal needs. And second, we will look at grants that have a 75% contribution from other agencies is what's suggested as a criteria. Or, and then you gave us an exit, or at the discretion of director. So you guys try to have it all, but when you go down 2 years later, people will be 1, 2, and then, okay, so if a director brings it up, the other 2 criteria will apply, and we're creating a framework. So my only caution is maybe there's a third way on this one, because if you say 75%, that basically means we're the way I interpreted it, reading the report, it would mean that we're the last player at the table, right? So somebody needs to come to us and say, we have 75%, of the project in place, and we're requesting a 25%. If I was the economic development officer in Orium, that's how I would interpret how it's currently written. Whereas in the case of the Arts Center, for example, we were the first money in, which helped attract further dollars. So it was more like a nice tea approach. And to me, that's of great value because we can be seed money, we're close in those partnerships, and we can help build them out. So I was a little bit worried about framing it that should be 75. Now, it could be that the end goal is that we do not contribute more than 25% to any given external project. But how you frame it, I think, does matter, and how organizations will perceive it. And so the third way is, I think there might be just a different way to say, to have that category in the portal, which is capital contributions. That kind of fleshes out a little bit so that there is transparency, because the act, not the act, but the federal framework for community works does allow third-party organizations, and we are devoted to community partnerships. We know we can get good leverage out there. So I would just like to see that framework, and then just to say, please contact staff early if you have a capital projects. I would not necessarily put those hard restrictions, because they'll probably all look different. And for me, it's no problem to stack them as we currently are. I think it's worked well the last 2 years. I think we're not fools. We understand that we do have internal needs for capital projects for the RD, but I'm always happy to look, because we do know that nonprofits do provide a lot of public benefits, and I'm always happy to stack them against our internal projects, and then it's a decision of staff and the board whether we pursue them. So yeah, so I've changed a little bit, but not too much from my comments from a year ago. But if there's a way, I was rambling a bit, but if there's a way to integrate that feedback into that last component of the capital, I think we can play an important role in our communities in supporting new projects. So the rest of it, I'm thrilled. I think you guys are really nailed it, and I'll really look forward to see that portal come together. Yeah.
Doug, you had some comment there?
No, thank you for the comments. I think I was just going to point that recommendation number 4 really, when you're reviewing this, really speaks to the capital community works fund. So just as you're going through your process.
Number 4, sorry.
Recommendation number 4, that electoral community works funds be reserved for internal Comox Valley Regional District projects, with exceptions made on a case-by-case basis. So if everyone's in agreement, so just pointing to that.
Director Hermier.
Thank you. I'd also like to support Director Arbor's comment about for capital grants that we look at being one of the first funders, and we can always, the language could be subject to 75% of the funding coming from other sources, and so that may be one way to get around the language issue, and so that we're not the last to come to the funding table. I have a list of questions too. Sadly, we do not have a lot of community halls in Area B. But our residents obviously benefit from the halls that are out there, Merville Hall especially. So if staff can consider a way for Area B to contribute to hall maintenance. I don't know if anyone's ever approached Grantham Hall.
Yeah, Grantham is not.
Yeah, they're not. I don't know if they've ever received funding from us, or
they're just odd fellows.
They're kind of, they're just odd fellows. Yes, they are. But to have, because for many reasons, having community halls, I think, are really important. And Area B sadly lacks, both on the Merville side and on the Lazo side, a hall that's publicly owned, that's not a church or a pub. It was very difficult to actually have community gatherings in Area B. So I'd like to just put that on the radar. Exactly, yeah. One question about the Arts and Culture grant. Are we also considering multi-year funding for non-facilities based arts and culture grants? I'm considering, the fact that we did give the Music Fest, funding this year. I'd like to make that a multi-year agreement because they are one of the economic drivers in the Valley when COVID allows them to come back up. And for them to know that we're committed to them for multi-years, I think is something important. It sends a message to them that we value them. So if the multi-year agreements can be not just for facilities-based arts and culture groups, that, I would be very open to that. And I don't know if staff have any comments or worries about non-facilities-based multi-year funding.
We have no comment or worries about it, but I think we were really hinging on the regional arts and culture strategy to guide us further. So we kind of retreated back into the premise of why the granted aid arts and culture grant service was set up in the first place. And then we're hoping that cultural services report forthcoming would guide us further for the directors to make those types of decisions on. I will acknowledge, in that there's also the Comox Valley Arts Council that doesn't actually have a permanent home. So they were made aware of this direction and also had concerns that they would maybe not be entitled to a 5-year agreement. And so we did put some thought into that, and we retreated back into the language of our bylaw just to make it cleaner so we could have an open conversation through the regional study to get a full understanding of how do these other long-standing groups fit in. So, and I think, the Arts Council and some of the bigger event organizers are good examples of groups that do fit in. But we were hoping to bring that forward in a more broader conversation. But that's just where our minds were going at the time.
That's fine. And I look forward then to that report of a sort of broader strategy around arts and culture. But just wanted to highlight that I do see some multi-year funding needed for non-facilities based. Question about the farmers market. I wasn't quite sure under like the map that you have the tree, because they no longer sort of fit, I guess, under arts and culture you were mentioning, but which grant line would they fit under?
We envision them fitting into the community, what's the new potential rural community grants program.
Okay,
and potentially eligible for a funding 4-year election cycle funding agreement.
And would that be multi-year or is that a year to year?
It would be multi-year for some of the long-standing ones. Which when we transfer them over, we'd reach out to Twyla and consider her as a potential long-standing. And if they decided to enter an agreement with us, we propose that to the board in the budget cycle.
Great. Under the climate action grants, I'm curious as to what kind of grants staff foresee us funding. Is that like Project Watershed type grants or more educational grants? What are you thinking?
Kind of allude this to Scott a little bit at the same time, but eventually it's a pickup of even, the clean air type initiative grants that came out of that would fall into that category. The broader our carbon offset money that's available, it's really, I think we envision it to being very open. Currently, those are the parameters that are set, but as that develops further, there's potential for other funding partners to come in, either through that avenue or maybe through the community grants avenue, depending on which direction it goes.
Will we be able to see, what do you foresee the rollout of that? Is that coming closer to 2022 or do you think that would come out a bit earlier?
I think they have a third party, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, they have a third party already enrolled for some of those granting programs to look at the opportunities and inviting submissions with the carbon offset grants. And then the other ones are already in place, sponsored partly by the provincial government for the air stove, for the wood stoves, etc. So if through the budget process, there was need to expand that further, that would be something that you direct staff to look at. Additional opportunities for climate.
I was just going to ask you that. How could we flesh that out a bit more? because that doesn't have its own service.
Not currently, no.
Yeah.
So it'd be a larger process if you wanted a larger funding that didn't fit into the rural community grants side of things, which are also intended to be broad encompassing at this, funded through GIA though.
So does that require a motion from us for you to start looking into that? And, or do we need to wait for the board to make that move? Yeah, I see Director Arbor wants.
That's a board motion, but.
Yeah, I appreciate, I know where you want to get to, and I would too, but I think it makes sense to incubate it inside the RCGs, the rural community grants. Yeah, and because I think there's plenty of room to build something and test it out. And then in 2, 3, 4 years from now, we might, as Doug said, if it expands and things like that and requires its own service. But I think to have it as a thematic inside the rural community grants, we'll start to funnel some stuff that way, and we'll learn. I already think, I'm sure you already have ideas. I already have ideas of organizations that may even come from outside the valley to help in the valley, our businesses and others around carbon and things like that. So I would say let it evolve. If we go to electoral assent, that becomes a whole beast of its own. And I don't think we have a strong enough a basis and experience in it to do it now. So that would be my recommendation.
And just lastly, you know, I know lately, or for the last couple of years, you know, the grant and aid, at least for Area B, you know, we've been spending quite a lot of what's available, like try and get that money out. And so in terms of process, because we do have kind of late submissions that come in and then ask for money, how do you foresee that? Is that going to continue? Are we still going to allow for late submissions? Or because it's really hard to judge, you know, where money goes when you get kind of stragglers at the end.
Yeah, I think your grant and aid comes into the budget process as a funding line item, which you'll be able to determine the maximum amount. At the same time, staff will be reporting your potential applicants and potential commitments that the board and the ASC, well, the ASC may want to make out of that. So if you feel that'll be an opportunity for you to suggest either increasing the budget or decreasing the overall budget for that maximum amount. But we did envision leaving space in that budget amount. So if we came in with, say, for lack of a better word, we came in with that $100,000 worth of applicants, and you decided, okay, but I know there's other things percolating in the community. Maybe I want an extra 20%. And we maybe build the 20% into the budget already. So we'd suggest 120, but maybe you wanted more, then that's the budget process is really your opportunity to bring that money forward and ask for more up to the maximum requisition, which in all cases we're well below.
So it sounds like we're going to stay flexible in terms of deadlines for applying to the, you know, the community, rural community grants. And
we're going to encourage hard deadlines for the community applicants and encourage them to be in on time so they can all be considered in a package. And if other things percolate throughout the year, then that opportunity is there to come forward still through similar processes.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the thinking of staff here in the sense of, and I would even, in the portal, it could just be, here's the deadline, it's May 1st or whatnot. And then you can have a, you know, a tag that kind of nods people for future years. You can call it late comers, right? So for late comers, there may be resources available, but you leave it so that it really encourages people to be in the same process, but you have that little window open in the event that other stuff happens. Because it is, I think from us, from a decision perspective, in Area A, I've just seen the deadline is, it just doesn't exist in people's brain. They're used after 20 years. They're like, well, I will submit when they submit. And then for us at the time of budgeting and all that, it's like, okay, well, what else might come down and who is late and all that stuff, right? It's, and because in Area A, I'm pretty tight with all the money tends to get spent. I don't want to make a mistake. Yeah, and sometimes the RSC comes in. So I don't want to make a mistake to leave something important out and they may not have applied. So I do like a hard deadline that encourages people to take it seriously. But the other component to that is those multi-year agreements will take out a big bulk of that flex money, which will also help us quite a bit in terms of resource allocations.
Well, I can tell you that it's true about some of the latecomer. In the past, there's been some emerging issues that came about. I think one time it was the Portuguese Creek, back when Jack Menard was part of the Solom River enhancement group, that there's an event that moved a sandbar or whatever and was cutting out the creek, and they had to get a machine in there and dig it out and put a swale to get the water to go this way, just in time for, I think, a record amount of pinks that came up the river shortly after that. So he was scrambling, he needed 30 grand right away, and luckily I had that reserve, and it wasn't anticipated at all. The other thing, of course, is you have to understand that most of these groups, to say they're amateur is maybe being generous. They're volunteer groups. Deadlines might mean something to, if they've got a person who's like right on the ball on their committee / board / organization. So you're dealing with that as well. I'm looking at this and I'm cautiously optimistic, but with emphasis on the caution. I've always hammered away at the fact that we need the independence, we need the flexibility for our rural community grants. I think it's important that it is our, as a director, it's our only discretionary source of funding anything in the Comox Valley. When it comes to some of these conversations we're going to have about arts and culture, I welcome that. I've seen that come forward a couple of times, and it all sounds very inspiring until it comes down to where the money comes from, and then everybody kind of deserts the table. And we're back paying for recreation facilities inside the municipality, but the municipality doesn't pay for recreation facilities outside in the rural areas. Hence, we have the Black Creek Call Association, which the idea of enlarging that function may make a bit of sense. They are definitely one of the better, well, probably the most organized and efficient and professional group in my area, at least. Some of the other organizations are, you're not getting the transparency, you're not really always getting the reporting out after the fact and stuff. And so I can see that moving into its own function. But I would ask, why not include Mount Washington in 676? They've got their community hall up there, which is the mountain sports. They're always coming here, unless we can find another home for that. Is that recreation then? Is that, how does that fit? But if they're paying into the catchment area, into the local service area, then they should see a direct return on that. And it could be argued that they're even more unavailable to use the major municipalities' facilities than even Black Creek and Oyster River, because they've got a half-hour drive to come down and use the aquatic center or the sports center or what have you. So yeah, it's I guess it needs to be done. We need to shake the tree here a little bit. And but the devil's always in the details. So I anxiously look forward to what comes out of this. Thank you. Any further? Okay, let's do her. On receipt. All in favor? That carries. Do we want to move these separately? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so move one. Any further discussion? On one, all in favor? That carries. Move two. And seconded. No discussion. On two, all in favor? Okay, that carries. Number 3. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Okay.
Especially in the case of Hornby, I don't know about Denman, but it's a somewhat not quite related issue, but just I just want to tag for us that the Hornby Island Rec Service has reached a max requisition, and I think it's hampering their ability. They haven't quite flagged that yet. They're just getting used to just being capped. And I was talking to them like, well, you know, whenever a service gets to the max, it should be considered what was the strategy ahead and all the rest of that. So just a little earmark additional conversation to have with them. That's it.
That's just not an amendment, just direction.
Yeah, just a suggestion to stuff.
Okay. So let's vote on 3. All in favor? Okay, and 4?
Can I, and I welcome staff input too, but I had a couple of friendly amendments, I guess. So I would propose that instead of reserved, we change that and we change the end of the sentence a bit. So I would propose that we write that Electoral Area Community Works Fund be primarily for internal Comox Valley Regional District projects. And then for the last bit, I was going to propose, where do I have it? Right here. With exceptions made for projects that provide clear and broad public benefits.
On a case-by-case basis.
Sure. The key change here was the primarily rather than reserved. Right. I don't know if staff wants to comment if they have an issue with it or.
Just to caution the board that I know that at the current time there may be funds available, but really we are pressed in terms of the needs for our own services for these funds, and just the more open it is, the more interest you'll get, and those will be hard decisions to say no to those people that come forward and those groups that come forward. They will always be able to make a compelling request for these funds.
And I notice you're not referencing the electoral areas. Electoral Area Community Works Fund reserved for internal Comox Valley Regional District projects, not internal Comox Valley Regional District electoral area projects. You don't want to restrict yourself either, right? You got to keep it open.
Good catch.
You never know what's coming up.
Was that you seconded it, right? So it's on the table and then get stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, for me, when the federal government did allow for third-party agreement, to me, it just, especially in rural areas, I mean, I've made that case a few times, and I know that there might be disagreement on principle, but I believe that it also helped legitimize our projects, the CVRD projects, because, you know, if we go and we say that we have to replace the Hornby Fire Hall, which we don't, but say that we did next year. And we have applicants from Hornby that say, hey, we have this art center and there's only 200,000 on the table. Then we can go back to the community. Okay, well, staff recommendation in the board is to put in the fire hall because fire hall is a primary essential service or water or what it is. Therefore, we will put it there. But for them to actually, for the community to have consideration of option, that's what used to frustrate me, especially when I was on the other side of the table where, and sometimes, not all governments, I don't believe that CVRD does that, but you also end up sometimes with community works contribution that are on make work projects because the funds accumulate and then community see this big investment in a project and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Why did it go into that, right? How did that decision get made? And if you don't have any kind of public process, you end up with people like me that say, hey, you know, is there an opportunity for conversation? So it's the principal thing, but I also totally agree with our CEO that people need to realize we have very limited funds that are discretionary to apply to capital, that most of the time they should apply to essential services that local government provide. So I'll leave it to the discretion of the chair because and my colleague, Dr. Amir, whether we return it back to the initial recommendation. And I'll support whatever at this point.
Well, let's go with it as written then, because there's enough flexibility there. We can, yeah, leave it the way it is. I mean, we're not binding ourselves in any way, I don't think. Okay, so we're agreeable that we will move recommendation 4 as written. Okay, vote on that. All in favor? That carries. Now I believe we're deferring 8. Is that correct? Or no? Number 8.
Yep. No, it's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. So, do you want to move the report?
Chair and directors, and I understand that there may be an ask to refer this to later, but it is an agenda item, so staff will provide a brief report on this matter, and you can decide whether to decide on it today or refer it to a later date. So I'll just ask Deb DeMarso to give a quick summary and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell. Through the chair to the directors, the purpose of this report is to provide the directors in regards to a recent request by HiSeek for Comox Valley Regional District to support and assist in an application for broadband connectivity on Hornby Island in a form of applying for a grant through the the Canadian Infrastructure Program. At the July 13th regular meeting, this was brought forward, and a lot of the staff report is also looked at the $50,000 study between Denman and Hornby, the digital roadmap and implementation business plan, which was very helpful in informing it. And asking for a $2 million potential grant request when it's been outlined that the project could cost up to $10 million is basically looking at understanding where the additional $8 million is coming from. And in this case, it was a challenge for us to feel comfortable securing that additional $8 million to help assist with the grant revenue side of the application. Furthermore, the report, the digital roadmap and implementation plan project, highlighted a few more items where we think further due diligence could happen prior to applying for this grant. For example, there's no willing service provider, and with an estimated operating system cost of $700,000, we see that as a potential red flag. There's still many approvals to obtain from a variety of jurisdictions, and completion, especially through the route analysis of the connectivity being proposed, and conversations with people on Denman and their internet committee have indicated that they have dissolved the committee and concluded that their work is complete, citing that costs to Denman are too great. So there's a few reasons there. Furthermore, as we move forward, there's 3 other projects that could be considered, or 4 other projects that could be considered for this funding, which is the Royston Union Bay Sewer Extension, although it might not be at the forefront this time because it's already within a stream of that funding. The Comox Valley Recreation Complex Service has a couple projects that could also go through another stream of the ICIP funding, the Community Culture Recreation Infrastructure stream. Hornby still has a boat ramp to provide a reliable boat ramp in the event of emergency, or increased recreational use could be brought forward as well. And Seal Bay parking improvements along to expand the lot and complete important user safety could also be brought forward. All these, well, the latter 2 have finalized plans, would just be easy and be prepared for the October 22nd deadline. And the other ones need a little bit more work, but feel they could be prepared for that deadline as well, if appropriate. So I'll keep it brief and short, and most of the information is there. Just quickly note that if the entire $8 million being borrowed was an annual debt servicing, would cost about $215 additional a year for an average home assessed at $500,000 over a 25-year amortization period. So it's a fair increase to the 2020 tax levels currently there. And that doesn't even cover, you know, whatever the fee is to get the internet to your house and other costs. So there's a few highlights to consider, and staff for that reason are recommending not moving forward on this grant at this time, but continuing to look forward to working with the partners to bring more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just bring more diligence to their application process and have more of the check boxes prepared. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
No questions? Director Arbor.
Thank you. And I did see just before the meeting that we had a request to defer from the organization, but mostly because the timeline is so tight and due to our staff capacity between now and then, that tips it for me in terms of trying to address it today. And yeah, the observation that Denman has dissolved, that's one thing. I think on the revenue side, the project may still have potential. How quickly it gets realized will depend on a number of things, but the revenue can be pretty good. And the role of local government can be there as well, as we see with the leadership of Strathcona on an initiative like this that they're doing. But no, I think for this ISIP call, I've been enough in the fundraising and program building to know that we're too tight against the deadline to kind of get all our ducks in a row, especially with the level of diligence that CVRD is recommending to consider this type of thing. And then I would point out that the second part does speak to continue to support HiSeek. I did see that last week, the feds issued yet again another round of funding where they specifically mentioned internet broadband. I didn't see the deadline, but probably HiSeek can sink their teeth into that one as a more viable vehicle than what is now a pretty short amount of time to put together a competitive proposal for October. So tough project. I like our CEO's comment before that, you know, while the federal government has mandated or has deemed internet services as an essential human right, they haven't quite put in the amount of funding that makes it viable for remote rural communities to connect. So that remains a topic that probably they should do better to create its own funding vehicle rather than to stack those types of projects around all kinds of other infrastructure projects. If they were serious about it with CRTC, they would create an envelope that is specifically dedicated to that and let rural remote communities compete for those amounts rather than stack against waterworks and sewage and all these other things. So yeah, so I'll get back to HiSeek, and it's a bit disappointing, but I think we should just move forward with the recommendation for this grant, but also specify that staff keeps working and provides a little bit of advice and assistance as HiSeek re-gears around this.
Director Hamir.
Thank you, and thanks to Director Arbor for those comments, because that certainly helps sort of helps with the decision making around this. And although, you know, I'm so empathetic to the plight of folks who don't have broadband in a time when schools are all, you know, relying on Zoom and all of our meetings, and to know that there is potentially another fund, that's really good news. My question to staff was more around if CVRD is going to be applying for this funding for some of the other projects that could potentially go forward, is this a sort of the extensive list, and will it be coming back to the board for sort of a final approval before it going forward, or where are we at for our own application?
Where a project is approved within the work plan and the financial plan, it's not necessarily to come back to the board unless the grant program requires a resolution also be included. And Doug, can you speak to the particular projects that are identified here and what might transpire in terms of vetting them?
Yeah, the particular projects here, we need to make an internal decision, I think, on which one's the priority. And we'll potentially have to look at a couple of them to determine whether the numbers were sufficient in the budget to cover the costs when they were originally put in capital. So there is a potential for the community, the CCR one, the Community Recreation Center one, to come back. And the latter two, we'd have to check on the Hornby ramp, but I think it might be okay. And the Seal Bay parking lot was budgeted, so we wouldn't necessarily come back with that one if that surfaced as a priority. And there's still an opportunity for the rest of the organization to submit other ones. It was a fairly quick turnaround. So if there's others percolating out there, we look at those in a priority basis as well.
So I don't know if they qualify, but bike lanes are coming up continuously for me. I don't know for the other directors. Coleman Road, Knight Road, Little River. I don't know if they qualify for this type of funding, but around COVID and mobility, this seems to be the issue happening right now. So if I could move that up the ladder, that would be great.
Yeah, again, all those projects would need to be at a sufficient space and moved along far enough that they'd be available to have a strong application. And unfortunately, we're just working on those active transportation networks through the RGS. So I would suggest, quite frankly, that none of them are necessarily going to be ready for October 22nd this year. But yeah, definitely hear the priority on that.
And of course, again, we're reliant on MOTI for anything that happens in their corridor. Well, have we had a good enough discussion on receipt? Call the question on receipt. All in favor? That carries. Recommendation? Okay, with heavy heart, we move the recommendation. Any other discussion? Because I have the same issue up in Dove Creek, of course. All in favor then? That carries. Okay, so on to new business. This is correspondence from Rob Peterson, who is the manager of the Georgia Strait Jazz Society and drummer for the Georgia Strait Jazz Band, about proposing an event, socially distancing event to honor first responders. I can speak to it a little bit because I've talked to Rob. My understanding is he's already changed his plan now. And this isn't going forward anyway, but I think we should receive it. The concept is good. My personal feeling is that we're not done yet, that we haven't seen the worst of it yet. So this may be something that'll come back. But my understanding is he's trying to do something now in conjunction with the Courtney Elks Club. So it may come back in a different form. And I don't know what, for one thing, would have to be channeled through the Georgia Strait Jazz Society. And for another thing, would probably come out of grant and aid. That big, loose, flexible kind of organization that comes to the aid of these wild ideas that emerge. So any comments? Okay, on receipt, all in favor? That carries. And I guess that brings us to in camera. So motion to go in camera. All in favor? Okay.